If you expose it to the light, you may hurt it. If you get it wet, it will multiply.
All that from water? They got wet?
Yeah, plain water.
And most important, no matter how much they beg, never, never let them eat after midnight.
First off, can you remember the 3 rules of Gremlins?
Oh, I remember the 3 rules, and if I ever forget them, people oftentimes on the street shout them at me. So someone will be like, "Where's Gizmo? I hope you're not getting him wet. Are you keeping him out of bright light?" I'm like, yeah, no, I got it under control. He's in the closet, nice and dark, and it's dry. Don't feed him after midnight. Of course, that's always been a source of amusement for us involved in the film because it's always after midnight of some kind.
Exactly.
So that's a very kind of like strange rule that's impossible to follow.
How do you feel being so closely associated with an 80s classic?
You know, it's one of those things where you know you're going to be known for something. So why not be known for something that's still really popular and kind of beloved, and people use expressions like it's an American classic. Every Christmas comes along and they show it at Christmas time, you know, every year along with A Christmas Story and Die Hard. It's one of those 80s movies that has a bit of a Christmas theme in it, so it sticks. I mean, it feels amazing. As far as these guys were concerned, there's kind of an amusing story, which is every time that we would do a Gremlins film, we would shoot them on Warner Brothers Studios. There were 3 days in Gremlins 2 we shot in New York, and there was 1 day in Gremlins 1 where we shot in Pasadena for the sheriff's station. Every single day I would drive off of the lot, the security guards would make me pop my trunk and check to see if I was stealing a Gizmo. And I was like, I'm like the main character in the picture. They're like, that's why we're checking your trunk, because you have so much access to the Gremlins and the Gizmos. And each one of these animatronic creatures was about, you know, between $35,000 and $45,000 in terms of 1984 dollars. So they were very aware that everyone would want one of these, especially cast members. Well, you know, I didn't do his voice, Howie Mandel did, but here's what I'll do. I'll do an impression of what I heard when I worked with it, okay? So I'd have my little Gizmo here, and I have him in my hands, and all the wires, my shirt sleeves would be down, all the wires would be attached to me, and they would go down my leg, and they would come out my sock and go across the room, and you'd have people with the thing. And so when I would say, "Hey Gizmo, how are you?" And Gizmo would go, that's all I would hear. I would just hear the clicks and the whirs. And one person would do his arms, and one person would do his ears, and they kind of divided the labor up so that everybody was doing a different piece, and they would have to coordinate them. All of those amazing animatronic guys would have to coordinate it so that it looked like one living, breathing organism. And as you can tell, they did an amazing job.
Phoebe Cates was riding high on the success of Fast Times at Ridgemont High. How was she to work with on set?
Well, you know, there was a certain amount of hysteria around her. After that scene, I think it was really very, let's just say it was a very charged scene. And it made a very lasting impression. People still talk about it 30 years later. So if she and I would go out somewhere, guys would see her, and rather than approach her, they'd freak out. They'd be like, "Oh my God, there's Phoebe Cates. Go and say something. I'm not gonna say you say something to her. I'm not gonna say that you do it," you know? And it was like they were afraid of her because she sort of had this, I am the pool goddess kind of thing going about her. And so guys kind of like, even huge football player guys would like sort of react to her with awe, and they were completely intimidated, which was so funny because she is one of the nicest, most approachable, down-to-earth, cool. She's like, you know, she's a beautiful woman who doesn't have that sense of, I'm amazing and maybe one day you'll be able to talk to me. She doesn't have any of that.
Have any famous people ever approached you to talk about Gremlins or sign memorabilia?
It's interesting you should ask that because one time I was at the whiskey bar here in Los Angeles, and this guy came up to me and he said, "Are you Zach?" And I go, "Yeah." And he looked like a rock and roller. I couldn't quite place him. He says, "Could you come with me, please?" And I went, "Sure." So I followed him, and we kind of wended through the packed bar, and sitting in the corner was Marilyn Manson. And Marilyn Manson says, he was in full Marilyn Manson getup, and he stuck out his hand. He goes, "Hey, I'm Brian." I go, "Hey, Brian, how are you?" He goes, "Cool. Listen, I don't know if you know this, but I'm like a huge Gremlins fan and 80s fan in general, and I collect lunchboxes. And I have a Gremlins lunchbox, and I was kind of wondering if you would sign it." Every lunchbox that you got in the 80s came with a thermos like this. I know because my mom went out and got one. She would never use the lunchbox because she was a 40-year-old woman, or mid-40-year-old woman, but she's an avid coffee drinker, and she would use the thermos everywhere. And people would say, "Why do you have the thermos of a 10-year-old?" And she would say, "Well, my son happens to be the star of the picture."
Gremlins and Indiana Jones were released in the same summer. Parents are not too pleased because they're saying this is a little too violent for a PG movie. The PG-13 rating is a result directly of two Spielberg movies in one way or another. Do you feel that it was a fair assessment that your film was a little bit too violent for kids?
Well, you know, I think the whole PG-13 controversy also had a lot to do with the way that the film was marketed. If you look at the poster, it's basically my hands holding the box and the little Giz guy is inside there doing his thing with his cute little paw going, "Oh, Billy," coming out over the top. So everyone goes, "Oh, it's going to be E.T. 2. It's going to be so cute," which it is for about 43 minutes. Then suddenly you're, scaring the pants off of every 7, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old kid that they brought there. So I felt that it was kind of fair for parents to say, "I thought this was going to be E.T. 2, given the marketing campaign." And it's more like, as Joe Dante called it, it's more like It's a Wonderful Lizard of Oz in hell. That's really what it is. It's two movies. It's the first half that lulls you into a false sense of security, and then it's the second half, which is like this kind of brutal, somewhat vicious flip side of E.T., since the Mogwai basically is like, that's one of the reasons why it's Chinese. It's like yin-yang. It's like the good and the evil kind of a thing. So that, combined with 2 weeks earlier, the heart getting ripped out and the guy screaming as his heart is beating and everything like that, I could see how parents back to back, maybe if they had been separated by a few months, maybe it wouldn't have had the impact. But I think, the 2 out of the last 3 weekends, Junior now needs therapy. Something probably needs to be done about that. I really think the second movie, in terms of the box office success, would have done better had Warner Brothers not made a last-second decision. They were going to open it May 3rd, and if you know, that first weekend in May now is the sweet spot. That's where you see like Iron Man 3 and stuff open. The last second, they got some of the highest test scores that they'd ever gotten in the history of Warner Brothers movies. So they got confident, or maybe you should say cocky, I don't know. And so they decided to open it opposite Dick Tracy, which starred Madonna, who in 1990, you could argue was the biggest star in the world. And she was also dating Warren Beatty at the time. So we went head to head with Dick Tracy, and we pretty much got creamed. So I always kind of wonder what would have happened if they had just left it on May 3rd and let it kind of get that sweet opening, because we were opening opposite Mel Gibson and Goldie Hawn on Bird on a Wire. That was the picture that was opening there. Much easier competition in comparison to opening up against Madonna. You don't want to open up against Madonna in the 90s.
Tell me about your career post-Gremlins. You kind of fell off the radar a little bit.
Well, that's not exactly by design. That's just one of those things where, you try out and the chips fall where they may, and you get some parts that are good and some parts that aren't, and then you try out for things, you get to like number 2, and it's down to you and one other person. And so it's just kind of like you go through a phase where your luck isn't clicking for you as much as possible. I did a bunch of things over the last 10 years. I did stuff like an indie movie called Let Them Chirp a While. I did like a Law and Order Criminal Intent, those kind of things. And now I'm making the return to the horror genre in Hatchet 3, which is such a fun movie, and I'm so glad that I did it and got involved with people like Adam Green and B.J. McDonald, because Adam Green loves the 1980s about as much as any human being I've ever met. He is like a kid in a candy store. Every time I call him, he's got like Winger playing in the background and Cinderella's Long Cold Winter playing in the background. He loves the 80s. So that's kind of what's been happening to me in the last 7 or 8 years. All of the young people who grew up watching me have now become filmmakers, and they want to throw me in and include me in some of the new stuff they're doing. And my feeling is like, heck yeah.